So as you can see, this was, it's unclassified. It's report to the science director. Study of response of human beings accidentally exposed to significant fallout radiation. There's not just these kinds done, but it's done on chemicals. It's done with it's been being done all throughout our time. Yeah, so that's the reason. Yeah, see it in how it's responsive. You know, you may say, oh, they were all willing participants. No. In most cases, no. Maybe a little cut off, but it says in 1939 at the Iowa Soldiers Orphan Home in Davenport, Iowa, 22 children were the subjects of the so-called monster experiment. The experiment attempted to use psychological abuse to induce stuttering in children who spoke normally. The experiment was designed by Dr. Wendell Johnson, one of the nation's most prominent speech pathologists, for the purpose of testing one of his theories on the cause of stuttering. In 1961, in response to the Nuremberg trials, the Yale psychologist Stanley Milgram performed his obedience to authority, also known as the Milgram experiment, to determine if it was possible that the Nazi genocide could have resulted from millions of people who were just following orders. The Milgram experiment raised questions about the ethics of scientific experimentation because of the extreme emotional stress of the participants. The Milgram, finishing this from the last one, the Milgram experiment raised questions about the ethics of scientific experimentation because of the extreme emotional stress suffered by the participants, who were told as part of the experiment to apply electric shocks to test subjects who were actors and did not really receive shocks. In 1963, 22 elderly patients at the Jewish Chronic Disease Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, were injected with live cancer cells by Chester Southam, who in 1952 had done the same to prisoners at the Ohio State Prison to discover the secret of how healthy bodies fight the invasion of malignant cells. The administration of the hospital attempted to cover the study up, but the New York Medical Licensing Board ultimately placed him on probation for 1 year. 2 years later, the American Cancer Society elected him as their vice president. In 1952, professional tennis player Harold Blower died when he was injected with a fatal dose of MDA at the New York State Psychiatric Institute of Columbia University. The United States Department of Defense, which sponsored the injection, worked in collusion with the Department of Justice and the New York State Attorney to conceal evidence of its involvement in the experiment for 23 years. Cattell claimed that he did not know what the Army had ordered him to inject into Blower, saying, "We didn't know whether it was dog piss or what we were giving him." I know it's cut off a bit at the top. Injected dozens of children with tuberculin. Dozens of children with tuberculin at St. Vincent Orphanage in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, causing permanent blindness in some of the children and painful lesions and inflammation of the eyes in many of the others. In the study, they refer to children as material used. In 1909, Frank Crazier Knowles published a study in the Journal of American Medical Association describing how he had deliberately infected 2 children in an orphanage with Molluscum contagiosum, a virus that causes wart-like growths but usually disappears entirely after an outbreak in the orphanage, to study the disease. During the decade of 2000 to 2010, artificial blood was transfused into research subjects across the United States without their consent by Northfield Labs. Later studies showed the artificial blood caused a significant increase in the risk of heart attacks and deaths. In 2010, Facebook breached ethical guidelines by conducting a research experiment to manipulate 700,000 users' emotions without their consent. At Harvard University in the late 1940s, researchers began performing experiments in which they tested diethylstilbestrol, a synthetic estrogen, on pregnant women at the Lying-in Hospital of the University of Chicago. The women experienced an abnormally high number of miscarriages and babies with low birth weight. None of the women were told that they were being experimented on. I know it's cut off there. It says a participant, Dan Mackinson, died by suicide while enrolled in an industry-sponsored pharmaceutical trial comparing 3 FDA-approval atypical antipsychotics, Seroquel, Zyprexa, Risperidol. Writing on the circumstances surrounding Markinson's death in the study, which was designed and funded by Seroquel manufacturer AstraZeneca, University of Minnesota professor of bioethics Carl Elliott noted that Markinson was enrolled in the study against the wishes of his mother, Mary Weiss, and that he was forced to choose between enrolling in the study or being involuntarily committed to a state mental institution. Further investigation revealed financial ties to AstraZeneca by Markinson's psychiatrist. Dr. Stephen C. Olson, Oversight and Biaser in the AstraZeneca trial and the inadequacy of the university's institutional review board protections for patient rights or human rights. Operation Top Hat is a declassified program. Again, the medicine and the military-industrial complex are one and the same. In June 1953, the United States Army formally adopted guidelines regarding the use of human subjects in chemical, biological, or radiological testing and research, where authorization from the Secretary of the Army was now required for all research projects involving human subjects. Under the guidelines, 7 research projects involving chemical weapons and the human subjects were submitted by the Chemical Corps for Secretary of the Army approval in August 1953. Many people have written, this is the most recent, well, it was updated 2021, written 2017, the 6 most evil human experiments perpetuated by the U.S. government. There's more than that. The U.S. government used Americans as unwilling test subjects in their human experiments and got away with it for decades. Whether it's chemical, whether it's biological, it doesn't matter, everything. And most especially would use kids that don't have a guardian who are in the state system. And so it's interesting, I also came across some of the worst experiments they did during the Holocaust. I'm trying to show the least worst of them because they're horrifying. So they used poison, like chemical warfare, that kind of stuff. Nowadays they just do it to people in boot camp, right? Army, Marines, they just do it. You got to be able to handle war, right? To test the potency levels of poisons by shooting the prisoner with poisonous bullets. Again, this was during the Holocaust. Also during the Holocaust, mustard gas experiments. They first burned the prisoners, then tried to treat their burns, and definitely not out of pity. No, none of this was about medical. This is just sickos. And yet, Operation Paperclip brought many of those sickos into America because our military-industrial complex, that handful of corrupt ones, brought that science into this country, that research. So I'm kind of covering this one. This is a twin experiment. Yes, most people know the Nazis, their scientists were obsessed with twins. So they sewed them together, and I'm not going to show it, but yes, you can see the limbs on each side. You can look it up if you want to. Head injury experiments. They hammered the heads of little kids. Yep, to see what they could handle. So then when you see that how throughout from the time going back to the beginning and continued on, how that's still been happening, and many times, and I'm not even showing you half of them, citizens didn't know about it, then it should really raise a red flag, because the research And the scientific community, in my opinion, and I'm saying it as a nurse, unfortunately, is out of control at the research level.